just a runaround, well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 PM for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 PM and repeated every morning at 5 AM. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 PM every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Armistice Day is coming very soon, and yet in central London on 11/11/11, that special moment, there is a pro-Palestinian march plan with up to 1 million people, should it be allowed to go ahead. We look at Storm Ciarán, the damage that it caused and the flooding, especially on the south coast, and we'll ask ourselves, is this exceptional? John Ketley will join me on that. And I'll be joined on Talking Pints by a former Prime Minister of Iceland, a little country that's managed to stay outside of the European Union and keep its own fish. Should we have learned from Iceland earlier? But before all of that, let's get the news headlines.
Nigel, thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest. Israel Defense Forces has confirmed they've completed the ground encirclement of Gaza City. They've now entered another significant stage in the war, they say. That as northern Gaza came under intensified airstrikes from the Israeli military as Hamas launched a series of missiles towards Israel today. At least a dozen combat jets launched missiles at Hamas targets, while artillery placements opened fire from ground positions. It comes after fresh strikes this morning killed 2 Hamas leaders in Jabalia, an area used as a refugee camp. The United Nations says it has serious concerns Israel's actions could amount to war crimes. The Rafah border crossing opened for limited evacuations from Gaza for a second day. At least 335 foreign nationals left yesterday. Dozens of the severely injured were also taken for treatment in Egypt following an internationally brokered deal. It's understood around 7,500 foreigners will leave Gaza over the next 2 weeks. The Foreign Office is aware of around 200 UK nationals in Gaza. Well, the United Nations has this evening said almost 80 Americans have been able to leave Gaza, one day after those evacuees began crossing into Egypt. In his trip to the region, UN Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he'll discuss the steps to minimise harm to civilians in Gaza.
Of course, we're intensely focused every single day on the hostages and taking every possible step that we can in concert with others to secure their release. Third and finally, we will be talking about how we can set the conditions for a durable, sustainable peace, durable, sustainable security for Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Police are investigating what's been described as a hate crime after a building in London was covered in red paint. Messages about the Israel-Hamas war were painted on the building, where weapons from Leonardo's is based, with the entrance splattered in red. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of racially aggravated criminal damage. The Prime Minister says his AI Safety Summit would tip the balance in favour of humanity. Speaking at Bletchley Park this afternoon, Rishi Sunak said this had been achieved by establishing a shared understanding of risks and reaching an agreement on testing the safety of new AI models before they're released. He says safely harnessing this technology could eclipse anything we've ever known. And the COVID inquiry has heard that Matt Hancock wanted to decide who should live and die should hospitals become overwhelmed. Lord Simon Stevens, who was Chief Executive of NHS England at the time, said he discouraged the former Health Secretary's plan, preferring to leave such decisions to the medical profession. The inquiry is continuing. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by simply saying play GB News. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. Last night, you may remember, I covered the story of a man who was arrested on suspicion of a racially aggravated Section 5 public order offence. The police told him he was being arrested because he was witnessed saying, "Why are they over here, etc. We let them into our country, etc." He was taken to an East London police station. I can now tell you a man has been released on bail until late November. I'm afraid I can say no more than that about it. For legal reasons, I will try to update you as soon as I can. So, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, in 1918, the guns fell silent on the Western Front and all the other theatres of war. It is a very, very important moment in our national story. And it's something, actually, that has very much been respected in recent years in a remarkable way, on top of Remembrance Sunday, which, of course, takes place at the Cenotaph, a ceremony that for years the Queen attended, and, of course, King Charles will be there on Sunday the 12th. But I find it pretty extraordinary that there is a big pro-Palestine march, in fact, demands from some for a 1 million strong march to come through the centre of London on the 11th of November. Now, I have said before, to great criticism, that I've worried in the past about a lot of people coming into Britain with whom we have no shared history and no shared culture. And this, I think, is a very good example of that. Should this march go ahead, and especially should it be allowed to go down Whitehall past the Cenotaph? And I think the answer just has to be no. I think this march has to be blocked. It's not as if there's a shortage of pro-Palestine marches. They're taking place all the time. And not just in London, but in many other cities as well. So I think this march should be blocked. Mayor Khan has said precious little about it. It's interesting to see that in Germany, they really are taking a very different approach. I was astonished to see the Vice-Chancellor, Robert Habeck, who's a Green, saying that what was happening on the streets of Berlin was unacceptable and that there would be tough consequences. 4,000 people so far have been arrested on the streets of Germany. I think for historical, for cultural, for national reasons, we should not allow a march past the Cenotaph on Armistice Day. And I feel actually very, very strongly about that. Please let me know what you think. Am I wrong in some way? Farage at gbnews.com. Well, joining me to discuss that and more generally what is going on in London and our other cities is Rear Admiral Chris Parry, former Royal Naval Officer. Chris, thank you for coming back on the programme. I mean, particularly as a former serviceman, it's a pretty special moment in the year, isn't it?
It is, and luckily it doesn't actually fall on the same day as the Sunday, which would be really pretty offensive to actually say we're going to have this march, this rally taking place on the same day as the Sunday. It is happening, of course, on the 11th, as you say.
And in recent years, years ago, the 11th, the whole country stopped. But in the last decade, actually, you can go across Waterloo Station at 11 o'clock on the 11th. And I mean, it is still a moment on top, isn't it, a Remembrance Sunday?
Yeah, and I hope that we're going to see on Saturday, if this rally goes ahead, we're going to see large numbers of people falling silent for 2 minutes at 11 o'clock.
Well, I wonder about that.
If they don't, it tells us everything we need to know about what people think about this country and about its customs and traditions.
I made the comment a moment ago that there are people who've come to this country with whom we have nothing shared in terms of history and culture. And prominent among those is an activist called Dili Hussein, who's been incredibly active. And he does have a prominent role in the Palestinian community, very prominent on Twitter this week. He said this: "We are expected to observe 2 minutes silence on Remembrance Day. The defeat of the Ottomans in World War I, the colonisation of Palestine by the British Mandate, and the 1917 Balfour Declaration is when the idea of Israel was actualised. there will be a resounding rejection of this silence this year and for many years to come. He doesn't actually go on to say who he would have preferred to win World War II, which might be quite an interesting question. How do we cope with this, Chris? We've got people living in the country, rising to positions of prominence, who seem to loathe everything we stand for.
Well, I think they've got to be called out, Nigel. I think the person you mentioned, I think we've got to recognise these are not just people who are acting politically, they're attention seekers. I think these people have got to be called out. We've got vast numbers of narcissists, attention seekers, and people seeking to promote themselves, not only on social media, but in our political space. And we've got to do something about it. The other thing we have to accept is that when people say they're coming to Britain to escape tyranny, we don't expect them to turn around in our country and support those very tyrants who they say they're fleeing from.
And that's one of the most astonishing things. In practical terms, seems to me the police are scared of tackling this head on.
I think the police have had a look at this, as I would do in a military situation, and say, right, what are the rules of engagement here? And as far as I can see, the policy is one of de-escalation. Don't provoke a big crowd to do big things. And I would think that every single risk assessment so far has said, look, where's the greater harm? And to be fair to the police and to the politicians, we've had 2 very large rallies and marches, very few incidents, but actually quite a lot of crime going on within that group. And I think the decision's been taken. That's a lower risk than actually provoking it. We haven't seen any riot police. We haven't seen any heavy-handed...
calls from some MPs for the army to be sent.
No, I mean, that's not the army's job. You know, once the police have proved that they can't do their job, then perhaps there's some military aid to the civil power. Nigel, I think it's a question of they haven't been deployed to do the job. This is an act of political will and courage to do something about this. But the fact of life is, when you look at a crowd like the one we see ostensibly saying this is for Palestine, I think we know that Palestine, in inverted commas, is a sea in which many, many activist groups swim, including Hamas and all these other noxious supporters. And I'm afraid they've got to be identified. We've got to call them out. And I'm afraid we've got to deal with them. You know, Britain is a tolerant place. It doesn't have any place for intolerance. And I have to say, there are a large number of people to whom I would say that both ignorance and silence is violence, to turn round their phrase onto them.
Against them.
We've got lots of people who are standing by doing nothing. And you and I know that the John Stuart Mill thing applies here. You know, for bad things to happen, all it takes is for good people to do nothing. We've got good people doing nothing at the moment.
Should the march be blocked on the 11th?
It's not my decision, nor yours, Nigel.
No.
My view is if they are satisfied they can deconflict that march on Saturday from what is going to happen on the Sunday, and due respect is paid to our monuments, our way of life and our heritage, then it can go ahead.
OK, well...
If it doesn't, then that's a signal that all those people in that march do not respect the rest of us in the United Kingdom.
Well, as Kipling identified, the word "if" is a very big word.
It's a long
mean
word.
Many things. Chris Parry, thank you very much indeed. Right, I'm going now to join GB News' security editor, Mark White, who joins me live now from southern Israel, very close to the Gaza border. Mark, good evening. Bring us up to date. I've seen a statement that has come out from the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, saying that the Israeli forces have completed the ground encirclement of Gaza City, and that we have now entered another significant stage in this war. What are you seeing there on the ground on the border with Gaza?
Yeah, this is Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, who is the IDF spokesman, signalling that new phase that we're into now. But regardless of what's happening with the encirclement of Gaza City, we still have regular arms fire, munitions, artillery going in and missile strikes in the area where we are in northern Gaza, because it seems that although the IDF have pushed further south towards Gaza City, there are still pockets of Hamas fighters who are coming up, probably from tunnel networks out in the foreground there, and that's why we're hearing regular explosions. Even this evening, we're seeing the night sky, which is actually dark because, of course, the power is cut off to Gaza and only a few generators are providing some light in some places. For the most part, it's really dark, but it gets lit up regularly by the explosions of these artillery shells and these missiles going in.
There is reason, from an Israeli perspective, to think that they are actually achieving some success.
Well, certainly in terms of taking out Hamas fighters, Hamas terrorists, which is their determination, their goal to destroy this terror group. They are clearly making progress. They are dealing with Hamas, and they say that today they have attacked and taken out 150 Hamas fighters. But it's also clear that they are well dug in. They've been very well prepared over a long period of time for this battle they are now in.
Yeah.
And they have clearly lots of supplies of rockets and other munitions down in those network of hundreds of miles of tunnels that they can get up, they can pop up in different locations and just keep trying to ambush those Israeli Defence Forces personnel. We should say that although, of course, the fierce fighting has been concentrated around Gaza, there are significant issues now on the northern border, Nigel, with, again today, drone strikes, rocket strikes coming from both Hezbollah and Hamas, who are up there in southern Lebanon as well. And Israel has responded to that with fire on those Hezbollah and Hamas positions. But the town of Kiryat Shimona in northern Israel was badly hit by a rocket attack, a large fire in the centre of that town.
And Mark, finally, we heard about some British citizens getting over the crossing at Rafah into Egypt yesterday. Some reports today that some Britons had failed to get over that crossing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that the British nationals are a bit lower down the list in terms of those who are eligible to get out. It's being done in a controlled way, and today we were told about 400 US citizens were on the list to be allowed through the Rafah crossing into Egypt. But President Biden has just confirmed that 74 dual national American citizens have now gone through that crossing. So we don't know yet what's happened to the others and how many actually in total have crossed. But clearly, however many cross in this controlled fashion, it's just a tiny, tiny proportion of the hundreds of thousands of millions who are still trapped in Gaza and who can't get out.
Mark White, from the border with Gaza, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, Storm Ciarán. How exceptional was it? How much rainfall have we had? Is it unusual? Tornado warnings. Only one man to join us to discuss all of that in a moment. Legendary weatherman John Ketley will be with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Some of your reactions to the proposed million-man march that could take place on Armistice Day in central London. Simon says, ring of steel with the police and turn the coaches back on the M1 and the M4. And what Simon refers to is the poster I showed you earlier saying you can book coaches from Dewsbury and many other parts of the country to come to London on the 11th of November. And Colleen says, I am with you tonight, Nigel. These marches should be stopped. Makes me furious. Now, we heard of a tornado in Littlehampton, West Sussex, over the weekend. Gusts of wind on the lovely island of Jersey of up to 104 miles per hour. Quite extensive flooding in Northern Ireland, in Hampshire, in Dorset. What does it all mean? Was this a major weather event or just what we would expect at this time of the year? Well, I'm joined, as I said earlier, by John Ketley, the legendary weatherman who, of course, worked at the Met Office and the BBC. John, thank you for joining us. How big a deal was Storm Ciarán?
Well, it was a brute of a storm, I'll give you that. It was a brute of a storm. But, of course, it was fairly restricted when it comes down to the speed of the wind. We'd talked about the winds of 90 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, but that was just really across the Channel Islands. Across the south coast of England, maybe 75 to 80 miles an hour, damaging enough, of course. But as you came inland, I suppose a lot of people today were thinking, well, what was all the fuss about? But many places have seen some very heavy rain, and I've just been looking at the figures. The last 24 hours, a lot of places have seen 30 to 40 millimetres of rain, and there's still plenty coming down as well. So it was a brute of a storm, and it was always going to be involved with the track it was taking. It looked like it was going to track a little bit further north than it did in the end, but it is actually moving north now up through the North Sea. So it's not finished with us yet, but the storm force winds have certainly died down. It is going to be a very breezy night, and there is more rain and certainly some more flooding to come in the next 24 hours in different areas of the country than we've seen recently. But of course, some parts, eastern Scotland and Northern Ireland that you've mentioned already, down across the southwest and coming off the Welsh mountains, these places are already saturated. Yeah. My garden is actually like that as well, and I've only had about 7 millimetres today. Some places have had a lot more than me.
And John, you know, the rain's a funny old thing, isn't it? Because, you know, often we report on this programme that a hosepipe ban has come in parts of southern England, and indeed we actually had some towns and villages without water for a week that took place just a few months ago in the summer. So we moan about the lack of rain, but goodness me, haven't we had some rain during the month of October and now into November?
Yeah, October, I think, was one of the wettest we've ever seen. It's certainly been a record breaker for some parts of the country. Notably, there's a place called Wattisham, RAF Wattisham in Suffolk, where they've had about 4 times their normal October rainfall. Another place, Sheffield, has seen its wettest ever, going back to 1880, something like that. So many places have seen some extremely wet weather, and this followed a bad end to September too, and we started November in much the same vein. The bad news is that we've seen this sort of thing before. We've often seen, actually, some very wet autumns just continuing right the way through to the end of November. 2000 was the wettest ever autumn, going back to 1766. And it's not unprecedented to get this sort of weather at this time of the year. Equinoctial gales, if I can say it, is the reason for it all, of course. It's all tied into that jet stream, which produces the low-pressure systems. They track in different directions and different positions across the country, and that's the reason different areas actually see the worst of the flooding and the worst of the stormy weather.
But, of course, it's one thing to have John Ketley telling us about what has happened to the weather. But the really important thing is, what does the rest of the month of November hold for us, John?
Well, I'm glad you're just sticking to November and not talking about, the C word at this stage. But at the moment, I can see more very unsettled weather for the next week or two. There is a glimmer of hope, just a few days perhaps, around about the, 16th, 17th, 18th, where it may just dry out a little bit, a ridge of high pressure coming down from Scandinavia. But that may well get squeezed out again fairly quickly. But at the moment, we're just looking at more rain, sadly, on the mild side, I suppose, for most of the time. So not much frost around at the moment, but it is really a poor spell of weather.
And a final thought, there was a tornado, mini tornado in Littlehampton on Saturday, damaging roofs, a tornado warning put out yesterday. And we hear this word tornado with a slight sense of panic, but actually, little tornadoes are not that uncommon in the UK, are they?
No, I suppose the figure is about 30. You'd normally get about 30 across different parts of the UK in a 12-month period, but some of them are never seen. They just go across farmers' fields and they arrive and go in about 90 seconds, and they don't really amount to a great deal. Some are a little bit more serious when they go through the middle of a town or a city. The big one I can remember was in Birmingham about 2005, was it, or something like that. A big one went through the middle of Birmingham. That was really quite severe, but hopefully and thankfully, not many do go through the main towns and cities.
No, absolutely. John Ketley, as ever, a delight to have you on the programme. Thank you. I must say, I thought it had been wet. I didn't realise it had been that wet. If RAF Watersham has had, in October, 4 times the normal rainfall. Now, it's that time of the year where we're wearing poppies, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, of course, their work goes on 365 days a year in countries all across the world. Something like graves and memorials to about, I think, 1.6, 1.7 million people. In a moment, I'll be joined by Peter Francis to talk about their work, and it is actually truly magnificent.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Peter Francis is the Strategy Development Manager for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And it's this time of the year when we think about the sacrifice that was made by so many people, not just in 2 world wars, but of course in all subsequent conflicts. And I think the losses that we suffered this century in Iraq and Afghanistan have kind of made us realise once again that very often there is a very big price to be paid for freedom. Peter, welcome to the programme to discuss the work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Now, something I've noticed in this country, my little local church, about 3 years ago, up pops a green sign telling us
Commonwealth War Graves.
That it's a Commonwealth War Graves site. Absolutely. And I was in Cornwall at the weekend, church I know quite well, and once again, a sign that had never been there before has popped up, Commonwealth. So what's been going on?
It's all about awareness, Nigel. I mean, many people think of the Commission, they think of the big constructed military cemeteries, France, Belgium and places like that. But they don't realise that actually here in the UK, there are 170,000 war graves that we look after in 13,000 different burial grounds. So chances are no more than 5 miles from your front door, there's a war grave. And actually, we have a little war grave app, which shows you exactly within a 5-mile radius what's near there. So it's about raising awareness for people of the graves here. We've also now got a volunteer programme here in the UK, 2,500 volunteers who are helping us keep an eye on those graves and making sure they're maintained as they should be.
Yeah, well, certainly the visibility is up, and we'll come to the app in a little bit because that's important. Now, across the world, you can't go across France, I mean, particularly the First World War battle sites, there are these huge monuments to the missing, aren't there?
Yeah, and again, it's perhaps for those of us that grown up with Remembrance, it seems like a natural thing to do, but it was one of the really, really vexing things that touched the Commission when it was founded in 1917. We had this commitment, revolutionary at the time, to remember everybody by name, regardless of who you were, where you died, how you died. And the memorials to the missing were the solution for those with no known graves, this industrialised warfare that caused men to simply disappear without trace. And yes, they are some of the most iconic and most visited sites that we have anywhere in the world. Places like the Menin Gate and Thiepval on the Somme, for example.
Yeah, no, they're remarkable places. And what you notice about the Commonwealth War Graves, particularly if you go in May, June, July, that time of the year, is you'll see roses, you'll see garden flowers. By contrast, if you go to the military sites for Germany, even for France, Portugal, there are so many different nationalities. I mean, those are all pretty dour. Ours, somehow, despite being places of immense sadness, they have light and colour and flowers, don't they?
They do, because I think there's a recognition that cemeteries are actually places for the living as well as for the dead. There has to be something that encourages somebody to go. There is something about the gardening, that English kind of country garden feel that we try to embody that makes sure that there's the right atmosphere to remember the dead. We quite literally garden the globe as an organisation. We're probably one of the world's largest gardening organisations. You might measure your borders at home in metres. We measure ours in kilometres.
Yeah, and they're magnificently kept. And for those that haven't been and visited these sites, they are truly remarkable. You've got the big factory outside Arras where if the gravestones start to weather and wear, you replace them. And this is continual work, isn't it? Funded by?
By our 6 Commonwealth member governments, each of whom pays a sum in proportion to the number of graves that nation has. So the UK is about 3/4 of our budget.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, the interesting thing about all of this, Peter, is that if we go back in time, First World War, Second World War, there were some families that began, in fact, Thomas Cook were taking people in 1919 to Ypres in large numbers and really made them a big travel company. Some people couldn't resist going back. Others just said, let's forget about it, let's just end it, let's just let life move on. And when I first started getting interested in this, in the late 1980s, to find out and research an individual soldier meant visiting Kew, the Public Records Office, and going through books. Now, of course, the online facilities that are offered are extraordinary. And a little story. My sister-in-law came to me last October with a medal that she'd been given by her father, didn't know what it was, looked at it, and it was a Canadian Cross of Remembrance, a Canadian soldier who'd been killed. Well, it turned out this was her great-grandfather. She'd no idea she'd lost a great-grandfather. But by going on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission sites, we were able to locate the cemeteries, the positioning, and on New Year's Day I took her over there, and we had but this is now accessible. Soldiers killed in the war, this is now accessible to everybody, and if they go to the Commonwealth War Graves site, there's a massive information there, isn't there?
It's a fantastic resource, Nigel. It completely changed the game for us in terms of how we remember and make people aware of the sacrifices made in those 2 world wars. That decision that we took back in 1998 to put our records on the internet for the first time really did change that face of remembrance. But we're constantly adding to it. It's not just a static site. It's not something that we just simply posted up there and allow to kind of meander and forget. And what we've done this Remembrance time is enhance it still further by allowing people to start to upload their photographs and their anecdotes and their stories of the dead.
Yes, and this is a new feature this year, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's almost like a sort of live blog that you can contribute to.
It's about putting a human face back to the inscription in stone, that recognition that behind every single one of those headstones or names on a memorial is a human story waiting to be told. And forevermore, Stories of the Fallen is the new free portal that people can log on to via our website. They can upload their anecdotes and stories. We don't change them, we don't fact-check them. It's important that the families own that sense of history. And then it's creating a resource for the future. So when our younger generation comes along, it immediately kind of attracts them and humanises that sacrifice.
So if people want to go onto this site and contribute their own little bits of family history, however sad and tragic some of them may be, how do they do this?
Literally go to the Commission's website, which is at cwgc.org/stories. It's a really simple tutorial. It will take you the way through how to upload the story, how to upload the picture. We have a group of volunteers that monitor it to make sure nothing silly is uploaded, but we don't edit the stories and we don't fact-check them. It's very much about owning the story, creating that resource and giving these people back the identity of who they were.
Now, back to the 13,000 burial sites across the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
I was astonished to find, many years ago, a series of 4 or 5 headstones, and one of them was an RAF George Cross. There, almost like this bloke had been forgotten, and I've done my best, and I've done my best, and I've managed to get. He's going to be recognised now in the museum at Biggin Hill. He'd sort of been forgotten, despite the fact he won a George Cross. But you're saying now, on your app, we can discover, we put in our postcode or whatever. How does it work?
Literally that. You put in your postcode, or actually you just switch on your location software on your phone, and it will say, you have these many war graves around you. You can click on them, find out more information.
Find out who it is that's there.
Exactly.
Cause of death.
Exactly, their service. And then also, perhaps if we have a personal inscription that was chosen by the family at the time, that will be on there as well, as indeed. So you can start to build up a picture of who they were, what they were doing, and of course the impact that their death had on their families and communities, not just here in the UK, but as far afield as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and India.
Well, I have to say, the CWGC, you really are fully into the full high-speed internet modern 21st century, and I can't help it. I'm a fan, big fan of the work that you do, and thank you for coming on. And think about what Peter said, perhaps it's a rainy Sunday afternoon in the winter, and you just go onto that site And you can go and visit local churches, local places, and find bits of local history that may well have simply been forgotten as those generations die out. Now, talking of poppies, this is a real What the Farage moment. Sir Keir Starmer, leader of His Majesty's opposition, a couple of days ago was speaking at Chatham House. Let's have a look. So there he is speaking, and he clearly is wearing his poppy, and he very clearly he's extemporising. He's not reading off a cue or anything like that. He's doing actually, at a place like Chatham House, where we discuss big global affairs, he's doing what a good political leader should do. Now, just remember the tie, the knot, its position, the shirt, the colour of the suit. Because here's the next clip that was posted on behalf of Keir Starmer. And you'll notice that the shirt is the same, the tie has the same crook, it is the same suit. But there are two big differences. One is the poppy has been removed. The second is he's wearing glasses and clearly reading every single word. And that's because the first speech was about the international situation. The second speech was a direct appeal to the Islamic community in this country, so many of whom are Labour voters. And he chose, as I see it, he chose to ditch the poppy. Now, Labour have been challenged on this, and a Labour spokeswoman has said it was absolutely not a deliberate decision and is in no way linked to the content of the video. Really. So some people say that speech on Islamophobia was given about an hour after Chatham House. What happened? Did a magpie come down and pinch his poppy? Did it fall out by magic? Well, maybe the leader of the opposition is not quite as straightforward as he would always have you believe. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be joined by a former Prime Minister of Iceland, the youngest ever Prime Minister of Iceland. And there are many things to talk about, but you know what? They kept their 200-mile territorial fishing rights after they beat us in the Cod Wars back in the 1970s, and they never, ever joined the common market, let alone the European Union. Could we have learned some lessons from Iceland, little Iceland, a little bit earlier?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The dinosaur hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK. Here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's time for Talking Pints. I am joined by Sigmund Gunnlaugsson. I may even have pronounced that correctly. Former Prime Minister of Iceland. Delighted to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
For Talking Pints.
Nice to be here with you.
Thank you. Now, democracy, parliaments, the gorge. I've been to Iceland and I've visited this site.
Yeah.
You know, where in midsummer, as I understand it, the tribes would send representatives from all across Iceland. You claim to be the oldest recognisable, the Athling as it's called, the oldest recognisable parliament in the world.
Yes, since 930, which also makes us a quite old country, because with parliament, Iceland was established as a nation state. This was before the German tribes arrived at what they would later call Berlin. It was before the Battle of Hastings and you becoming England and Britain. So we've had a long history, and we've always had the same borders because we're an island, as you are. And we have fought for independence, lost it, and gained it again.
Who did you lose it to?
First to the Norwegians.
Yep.
And then the Danes took over Norway, and thereby Iceland as well. But even in the early 19th century, or the middle of the 19th century, Icelanders, at that time maybe 50, 60,000 people, were absolutely sure that they should be independent.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it rhymes with what I believe in.
And it worked. Independence worked if you use it.
Yes.
And that's the problem. That's what I worry about now, both regarding Iceland and the UK, is that we are not making enough use of our independence.
Now, one thing that you did keep was your fish. And I came many years ago and met the then Icelandic fisheries minister, and you have and we fought a cod war against each other.
3 cod wars.
3 cod wars, so right through sort of the early middle part of the 1970s. And you won. You won, we lost.
Every time.
In fact, you won so comprehensively that international sea boundaries were changed from 12 to 200 miles, and you fiercely protected that 200-mile limit. Is fishing still a highly profitable industry in Iceland?
Yes, it still is, but of course the economy is much more diversified now, and we are exporting a lot of products. Amongst others, pharmaceuticals and aluminium. We are the second biggest aluminium producer in Europe, which takes a lot of energy.
Is that because of hydroelectric? Or?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's,
you need a lot of electricity to make aluminium. Yeah.
But yet we have people claiming to be environmentalists who would like to close all our aluminium production, which would mean it would move to China, where it would emit 10 times what it does in Iceland.
More emission. No. Isn't it funny? These arguments are all really very similar in many ways to the ones that we're having. And joining the European club, joining the European Union, it was just never going to happen, was it?
Well, soon after I started politics in 2009, becoming party leader 2 weeks after I joined the party, we had a left-wing government which decided to apply for membership of the EU. It turned out to be quite difficult for them, and we managed for these 4 years to prevent that from happening. And once my government took over in 2013, we withdrew the application. And I've been hated ever since.
By the globalists, the big
yes.
corporates, many of the banks. Yeah.
Also, trying to find things we have in common.
Yeah.
We, after the financial collapse, the banking collapse in Iceland.
Which was very dramatic for you.
Extremely dramatic.
And then it was followed by a volcanic explosion.
Yes, yes.
And
everything was going on.
I mean, it was biblical, wasn't it? You know, and
you could say that.
And your currency fell by, was it 80%? I think it fell by, or something like that. And
well, not quite, but it fell considerably.
Interest rates went up
by
25%.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really biblical stuff that was going on.
Yeah, it was scary at the time, and it was also scary to see how quickly this caused a lot of internal strife, rather than people all coming together as one would have expected of Icelanders, or I would have. There was a lot of internal strife in the country. But during my term in government, we took on the banks, the creditors of the fallen banks, which were huge foreign banks and particularly hedge funds. And I think it's safe to say, even though I say so myself, that we turned the economy around faster than any other country has managed to do in living memory. But still, of course, the globalists already hated me, so you can imagine what's happened in their view after that. So I've felt your pain when you've been telling...
Well, I remember I was in the European Parliament at the time,
yeah.
And I remember Iceland being talked about. You know, poor little Iceland, hasn't got the euro, outside the European Union. And I remember saying, you know, who would you rather be right now, Ireland or Iceland? And of course, I said Iceland, they all laughed at me. But because of your independence, because your currency could float,
yes,
because you controlled your own interest rates, because you were you ran the levers of the economy, you recovered. And actually, Greece has never recovered.
No, it hasn't.
Literally never recovered. So you did all of those things went well. You upset the global establishment. Your name was released in the Panama Papers. That made life difficult. Continuing.
I was put on the cover of a newspaper in Germany, along with I think Putin and Ahmadinejad in Iran, and me. A bloke from Iceland nobody'd ever heard of, but they saw it as necessary to get rid of it.
We're both fully paid up members, Sigmund, of of absolutely the same club here, and of that there is absolutely no doubt at all. So what now for you? You're still actively involved in politics. You've been over here for the art conference this week.
Mm-hmm.
Where does your career go from here? Is it politics again, or is it trying to influence opinion?
I feel I have to continue doing politics, because there are so many things that could be done so much better. And we have a very unusual government in Iceland now, which aims to be a sort of an apolitical government. So we have a left-green party, we have the former Conservatives, I call them former Conservatives, and the Progressive Party. And they came together to form a government which wasn't supposed to be about politics, but stability. And what did that mean? It meant the establishment took complete control of the country. Without politics, the establishment rules. So there are a lot of things I would like to see change in Iceland, and huge opportunities, so I will continue in politics. And there are also huge challenges.
Yeah.
For example, immigration in Iceland all of a sudden is out of control.
Yeah. So you see, they're all the same problems, aren't they?
Yeah,
they want to deindustrialise you, open the borders up. Now, you said to me before we went on air that you could solve our migrant crisis, our cross-channel migrant crisis. So, right, off you go.
In my opinion, looking at it from the outside, it's simple. Because people, particularly politicians, make these things so complicated. And they make things complicated for themselves, having given away power to some establishment that always is making things more and more difficult for them. So, when a boat comes with illegal migrants, take them on land, give each of them a bottle of water, and bring them back to France. Now, this should, in the long run, suit France as well, because I don't think they want to be sort of a middle ground in this huge influx of people going to the UK.
So just take them back to France with a bottle of water.
Immediately. take them back to France.
Yep.
The French must receive them because they are coming from their country. They left
a safe country.
Yeah. And they left France.
Well, we better get you hooked up with the Conservative government because they could do with somebody with a little bit of backbone.
The best solutions are often the simple ones. Yeah. So don't bother with Rwanda. Just take it back to France.
I was astonished to hear as we were going on air that all the way from Iceland, you're a GB News fan.
Yes. We have GB News in Iceland. If we have a satellite dish, and I know lots of people in Iceland that
really
prefer your news channel to much of the entertainment and news we're being offered on other channels.
No, I love it. Now, some friends of mine were in Iceland this year. They went up in June to fish for salmon and sea trout. Our population of those fish has declined. They loved it so much they went back again. I'm coming to Iceland next June. I want to come and catch some salmon and sea trout. And hey, here's your pitch. Should Brits visit Iceland?
Well, definitely. Iceland is a great country, the most peaceful country in the world. The nature is amazing. But you may expect, or should expect, the weather to be similar to the UK or even worse. Apart from that...
well, we're already coming in big numbers and we'll keep coming, and it's an absolute pleasure to be Talking Pints, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, tonight, Esther McVeigh is standing in for Jacob Rees-Mogg. Esther, what have you got coming up on the programme?
Oh, I tell you, we're talking about the police. Are they running scared? I mean, are they really policing those protests on the street? Hundreds of thousands of people have marched. They've shouted jihad. Are the police quick enough to act? And why aren't they acted? Do they feel cowed? Do they feel intimidated by the numbers? Or, as Sir Mark Rowley said, they need more laws. I don't think they need any more laws. I just think they need to do policing properly.
Well, Esther, I must say, what really is driving me mad, it seems to be that we're actually treating the police are treating different groups of people in very, very different ways. And what worries me is if we start to lose confidence in the police and their ability, frankly, to be blind to the religion or colour, but to deal with the crime, or potential crime as it is, then we're in trouble. Right, going to be great with Esther for the next hour. That's it from me. I'll be back with you on Monday. Still thinking about the jungle. Lots to think about still. I will let you know, all in good course. Before that, let's have a look. Is the weather actually now going, please, to improve?
Hello again, it's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather update. Whilst not everywhere saw the stormy weather, it was very wet and very windy for some, particularly southern parts, due to Storm Ciarán. However, that feature is now clearing its way into the North Sea, still bringing some blustery and very wet weather to eastern parts of the UK, particularly eastern Scotland, northeast England. As we go through the night and into Friday, here we are going to see some further heavy rain. Clearer skies towards the west and the south, and here under those clear skies, it is likely to turn a little chilly. Some places could get into your low to mid single figures. As we go through Friday then, we are going to see further wet weather, particularly for eastern parts of Scotland and northeast England. Could see some further flooding here with more disruption to travel likely as well. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers coming down on a northwesterly wind, so particularly across parts of Northern Ireland, but feeding into England and Wales as well. Some sunny breaks in between the showers, and we're likely to see highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius, so a touch higher than today. Into the weekend, and Saturday may start with some mist and fog patches, particularly in the north, then a swathe of wet weather and strong winds pushes its way up from the south, affecting many parts of England and Wales. Also some showery outbreaks across the far north of Scotland, but something drier and brighter in between. More showers as we go through Sunday into Monday, and temperatures staying near normal for the time of year. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.